I'm here with Sean Scully,
Yeah.
a Bray man, but he grew up. Where did you grow up, Sean?
I was born in Dublin, and we moved to Bray when I was about three and a half.
Oh, you're really a Bray man then, if you've been here since you were 3,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in your late 60s, or?
I was 79 last Monday.
Are you kidding me? You look great, man. I had no idea you're almost 80. Wow. So what year would you have moved to Bray then?
Somewhere about 1943, 44.
Okay, right in the wartime.
Yes, yeah.
It's interesting. Now, why Sean is talking with me today is that we've had coffee, and over the few years I've known him, he's brought up some interesting stories about his dad. And his father was just one of these guys that seemed to touch history and was an interesting man. And I said, Sean, we've got to get the stories about your father on tape recorded. And so he agreed just to sit down and tell some stories. So tell me about your father, Sean, and his name and a little bit of background.
Well, he was known as John Costello Scully, the Costello being his mother's surname. And we know he was born in 1901. And as a young man, he was actually trained as a goldsmith.
Goldsmith.
And
To make jewelry?
Jewelry, yeah. But probably the first real story, he played hurling when he was young, and in 1916 they were coming back from I think it was in Ringsend. They got off the tram and the GPO had been taken over.
Now let's give our listeners that aren't Irish a little context. That would have been in the spring of 1916. What month again is that the uprising?
It was an Easter.
Of course, the Easter
yeah.
uprising, and that would have been the Easter Monday. Easter Monday.
That's right, yeah.
And that's when the Irish, some of the Irish had gotten fed up with the English and had planned this uprising, which will turn in to a great, throwing off of the English, and then a civil war, and it's the beginning. It's the holiday in Ireland, and if you're connected with the Easter Rising, you're Irish royalty almost. Now everybody claims to be connected, but Sean really is here. So go ahead and tell us what happened. So they're playing hurling in the morning,
and they come back off the tram. They lived in Ballybock at the time, which would be a few miles off the centre city, and so they went over to the GPO, and with the hurls they were allowed to break the windows, but then sent home.
Yeah. Now explain why. So here they are, kids walking by. They see that everything's been occupied. It's probably tons of people are coming out, but they ask them to come in. And what a hurley stick? Hurley is the Irish. It's a uniquely Irish, amazing game. The fastest game on grass is what I've heard. It's just amazing. But they're sticks, like for the American, not like baseball bats, but kind of the same size about, but they're flat, where you can bounce a ball on and run with it. And what they do, they said, come in here and do what?
And they were told to break the windows.
Why was that?
So was the people there, the rebels as they were called, could fire out through the...
Right, so they could shoot out.
To shoot out through.
And once the bullets started coming in, it would be glass shooting everywhere. So
that's right.
They wanted to knock the windows out for them, so it wouldn't be a mess later. And that's amazing. What a nice little piece. Now, when he told you that, what's in your memories? Any other little detail pop up about that? Did they know what was going on or understand it? They were old enough.
I think they had an idea, but wouldn't have been fully aware of the exact.
Yeah, definitely not the consequences. Yeah.
Mind you, they would have been very aware over the next couple of days, because they would have lived quite near where all the fighting went on.
Amazing. Now, his family, were they, of course, we know, told me he's going to be involved in the old IRA, and you showed me a medal that he has. So he's going to get right involved. Tell me what you know about his progression. He's there at the Easter Rising, knocks out the windows before the fighting starts. Then what else do you know about his involvement?
In 1918, then the IRA would have, rather than an open fight, they went into guerrilla warfare. And so he would have become aware. He was only 17 when he joined the IRA. He was supposed to be 18, but he told them he was 18, and he borrowed his father's hat and put paper inside it to make it fit him.
Okay.
And they had to take an oath then to the IRA.
And that's before, when does the Civil War break out? Is that 22 or?
Well, the fighting with Collins that started in 1918, basically, and then it went on to 20.
So this was
22.
He gets involved with the Civil War. At that point, the British have kind of decided to some level to pull out. Is that correct?
Well, the World War One was still on, so
Right.
they brought in troops, and that they were known as auxiliaries, and the other section were black and tans, and they wouldn't have been as well disciplined as the normal army, and so they were pretty well hated.
Yeah, no, I heard a lot of stories about the Black and Tans, just the corruption and the abuse that went on through those guys. So they were fighting the Black and Tans, basically?
They would have been fighting the black and tans. His first ever involvement was he was given, they were raiding a lorry with troops on it, and seemingly they used to have cages over the soldier couldn't put couldn't throw hand grenades. But what they started to do then, they put fish hooks on the grenades.
They'd stick on him.
And so as they catch on the cage.
Wow.
But his first involvement, he was given the job of shooting out a gas light. It was all gas lights, no electricity in those days. And he said he was really nervous, and he was in a garden and behind the hedge, and there was a railings, and he got down and he aimed at the gas light, and he marked the railings with a nail file to make sure that
He got it, huh? Amazing.
That was his first involvement.
So, wow. So some neighborhood in or downtown Dublin somewhere to shoot out a gas light so things would be dark so they can come through. And isn't that something? Interesting.
Then he became more involved, and he became involved in the intelligence section of it. And seemingly one day after a raid, he came home, and there was 3 bullet holes. In those days, they wore long overcoats. You know, they were nearly down to your ankle nearly, and there was 3 bullet holes in the coat.
Goodness.
So his mother had to burn it because it would have been a real giveaway.
Goodness. Wow. Fascinating. Yeah. Wow. So anyway, so you grew up hearing these stories.
That's right, yeah.
Back as a young man.
The interesting thing was that while he told the stories, he told them things that actually happened, but it was never with a hatred of the British. So I never grew up hating the British.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Well, that's good. Yeah, he seemed like a real principled man when you talked about him, and just taught you a lot of good things. So he's in that. He's involved with. And the old IRA was with. Was not Collins. It was I guess De Valera.
Well,
and the
Collins
other guys.
would have. Collins was over the intelligence end of it, and
There was a split, though, right?
that was later on. That was
Okay.
after
His
truce,
assassination, his
yeah.
being killed. Yeah.
My father was involved. They burnt the customs house, because all the records and that were there.
Mm-hmm.
Now the saying goes that Collins didn't agree with the burning of the customs house,
Right.
but my father was involved in it, and when they were burning the customs house, the British troops then started to come to fight them all.
Yeah.
And in those days, at the customs house, there was a laneway. It wasn't a roadway like there is now. It was a laneway. And they ran down this laneway towards the Liffey, and the man with them said, the British troops are coming, get out, get out. And he fired at them, and then he turned around to wave them, and he was shot in the back. Now, it wasn't intentional, it was just he turned around. And I think he was shot something like 10 or 11 times.
By the British?
In the back, by the British. And a British soldier went to shoot him when he was on the ground. And an officer came up and said, don't shoot that man. And he actually survived that.
Amazing. Oh, was he the guy with the onions?
That's right. Yeah.
You told me this story before.
Yeah. Samely, when they, previous to that, when they be on route marches and that, he used to eat raw onions.
Yeah.
And when he was brought to the hospital, and the doctors couldn't understand how he survived, and he'd lost so much blood. And in talking to him, they said, you must eat something or do something. And he said he ate raw onions. And the doctors felt that his blood was so pure that that's what survived him.
That's fascinating. That's a little...
But my father and mother, man, they ran down towards the Liffey, and there's a man in a rowing boat, and he jumped into the rowing boat and said, rows across the Liffey. And seeing me, he said, the British will shoot me. I said, well, if they don't, we will row.
Right. Oh my gosh. They got away.
And that's how they got away.
Amazing. So your dad was there at the burning of the customs house. And it was at the records were there too, or was that just the customs or?
Yeah, there would have been a lot of records there.
That wouldn't be would that be the family records and all that type of stuff was stored there, or just the?
That I'm not too sure.
Okay.
I think there would have been family records there.
Just a lot of stuff stored. I don't know have enough, but I know that there's a lot of people not happy that all those records got burned.
That's true. That's true.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, that's amazing. He was involved with that. You know.
Yeah.
Would that have been probably 1919, 1920?
21, I think.
21. Okay. Wow. And so then he goes on. When does he meet your mother? When do they get married?
He knew her from the time he was quite young, because they lived quite close to one another. My mother was her mother died when she was 10 months old, and she was reared by her godmother, and her family were butchers, and she was friendly with my father's sister. And
so they knew each other.
So they knew each other from the time they were quite young. And actually there was seemingly one occasion when he was out, now they weren't married at this time, they were quite young, and they were coming down the road and he saw a British checkpoint down the road, and he turned around to a garden as if he was tying his laces, and he said to my mother, put your hand in my pocket, take out the gun, and put it in the hedge. He said, take note of the number of the house.
Wow.
And they turned around, went through the
checkpoint. Man. Came back later and got the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
like in the what they call Bloody Sunday, he was actually involved in Bloody Sunday as well.
Really?
Seeing the build up to it, at this time he was in the intelligence section, and he would have known Collins, and so they used to go out to near Clontarf. Now it was very different in those days. It wasn't like it is now. But seemingly he'd sit on the seawall looking out to the sea, with my mother facing up the other way, and he'd be getting the described these two men. What did he do? Well, he done
Okay.
that for seemingly a few weeks.
Right. Doing
And on the
surveillance.
day of Bloody Sunday, himself and another man, they cycled down the road. So it was a British intelligence officer that they were watching. And he was coming out of the house and they shot him.
Wow. Wow.
And
At his house. Yeah.
he just sat at the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And seemingly then...
Explain Bloody Sunday to
For
us.
those, Collins feared that the British intelligence were getting a lot of information and building up information on them all, and he decided that the only thing they could do is they'd have to literally get rid of the British intelligence officers. So there was something like 10 or 12, I can't remember the exact number, shot over that Sunday morning.
Wow.
That afternoon there was a match in Crow Park, and I think it was mainly the Black and Tans. They came in an armoured car, broke into the Crow Park. Of course it wasn't like what it is now, and they opened fire.
Yeah.
And a number of people were
In response to the killing
in
of the...
response to the killing.
They just
of
came and
the-
shot people randomly.
But after the shooting, seeing the father, he went out, met my mother, got on a tram back to Howth, and so the British Army were stopping the trams and seeing the question him. He said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, one of our lads has been shot," and he was saying, "Oh, that's terrible." And
Wow. And he's the guy, huh?
he was one of
Amazing.
those involved.
Amazing.
And seemingly then later that day he was in Crow Park when the shooting took place.
My goodness. Wow.
Of course, he lived down the road, literally down the road from Crow Park, less than a mile away.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
known as Ballybock.
Yeah. Man. He really lived through some of the major events
That's right.
of the day, you know.
On another occasion, their house was searched, and he used to hide a gun seemingly on a nail in the wall with a dishcloth over it. And a British officer was involved in searching the house, and his mother offered the officer a cup of tea, and so he went to wash his hands. He went to take the towel, and she said, "No, here's a towel."
Can you?
And
That's like in a
she
movie.
was always convinced that actually the British officer knew that there was something there and just didn't pursue it. He's so good. You hear all the bad stories, but you know there were
Sure, some people that kind of understood the struggle, yeah. Wow.
like the officer that saved that man that was shot.
Right.
Yeah, so then in when what they call the split came, when the truce came, and of course then the likes of De Valera didn't agree with the truce, where Collins did. My father believed that they were now very short of arms and ammunition, and they were running short of that sort of thing. And British intelligence were making inroads into the IRA, so he felt that the truce was the only solution. And of course that led to the Civil War, and so he was a captain in the army in the Civil War.
Your father was?
My father.
Wow.
And on one occasion they were on a roof and there was a fight going on, and one of the soldiers turned around and said, "Sir, can I move to the other side of the building?" He said, "Why?" He said, "The man in the far window is I can't remember if he said his brother or his father."
Their families were split, yeah.
And so that was so sad.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And seemingly he was to go on the convoy with Collins, but the orders were changed a day or something beforehand.
Wow.
He was to be on that
Wow,
that
amazing.
convoy seemingly.
Wow. So he was fighting he was on the side of Collins.
Collins,
He felt that they needed to
The
get the
National
truce.
Army,
Yeah. Wow. And so, of course, when there's finally not peace, but things calmed down. I guess how was that for him? Did you ever talk about the aftermath and all the kind of the rebuilding of the nation?
He then seemingly there was some sort of an argument or disagreement within the army somewhere around 1924-25, and he left the army, went into the police, and he put straight into the special branch, which would have been checking on the likes of what was now the new IRA.
Right.
And so he would have been armed and that, and he went straight into the special branch because of his involvement with intelligence.
Yeah.
And so he was promoted. He was a sergeant then, and then he was due to be promoted to inspector in somewhere around 1932-33. Up to that point, Fianna Fáil had refused to take their seats in the Dáil. And then they took their seats and actually got a majority, came into power. So they blocked his promotion and demoted other people, superintendents and that sort of thing. And they tried to transfer him down the country. But when he'd been brought into the police, there was a chap called Dave Nelligan over that end of it. And my father was only my own size, about 5'8". And he put him in what was known as the DMP, the Dublin Metropolitan Police. And he done that for a joke because everyone else in it was over 6 foot.
Oh.
But the joke worked in his favour because when they tried to transfer him down the country, they found the furthest they could transfer him was Dalkey or Whitehall. And they transferred him to Whitehall. And he was there for a number of years. But again, he always carried a gun, and getting off a bus one day, he was shot at by the IRA.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And seemingly for some years he slept with a gun under his pillow.
Wow, pretty nervous.
And actually, where we lived at that time, we lived in Drumcondra, and my mother used to love reading, and she would read to all hours. And at the time they were building a cinema just nearly across the road, and it seems there was a shed where they would keep tools and that, not like nowadays, but a galvanised roof on it and that. And this book my mother was reading, it was a murder thing, and there was someone just in the book coming up to stick a knife in someone else, and seeing the two cats started to fight, and no cats in the still of the night. I mean, this would have been during the war, so there'd be no traffic or anything like that.
Right.
And of course, this one cat screams.
She's bloody murdered. She.
Mother dropped the book right down into the bedroom, jumped into that, and he was going for the gun.
Oh no!
He read her out.
That's funny. That's funny. Was that World War II?
That would have been World War II, yeah, around 1940, somewhere around. I was born in 1940, in December 1940, and so it probably would have been 1941, 42.
Right, a little baby there, huh? Okay. Now tell me about, you said you're also, you showed me a newspaper clipping of your dad was in the, was affected by the bombing, the Nazis.
There was a bombing in 1941.
The Nazis were off target, basically.
That's right, yeah. There's various different
views of that, yeah.
Views of what exactly happened. Some people think it was a young pilot, and, of course, at that time Dublin wouldn't have been in the dark. But they dropped the bombs.
Thinking it was Belfast.
Yes, I think it was 4 or 5 bombs. And he was near where the first bomb dropped, and he was cycling on a bicycle, and he didn't actually hear the explosion, but he was taken off the bike and thrown against the wall.
Right.
Near a window, actually.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
And,
I saw that in the paper. You showed me a little clipping of the newspaper on that.
And, it was,
And that's kind of a, obviously that was huge for Ireland that they had gotten bombed by the Nazis. So a lot of people have told me that story, and to find out your dad was actually there and it's in the paper regarding him. And also you brought some pictures and an IRA medal, the old IRA, which is amazing honor for him to have, and a medal. When would he have been given that? I guess just at what period would that have been later on? Or you're not sure?
That would have been in the 30s.
In the 30s, okay.
30s. The only time I ever saw him wear it was there was a commemoration in the 1950s for the burning of the Customs House. It was actually done by a French artist.
The medal was?
No, this monument at the Customs House.
Oh, you mean there's a monument now?
The monument now. It was
okay.
It was done in the 1950s, and there was a parade.
Okay.
There, and that's the only time I ever saw him. Actually, he brought me in. I saw the
amazing
part of the parade. I was just thinking about that this morning.
Wow. And so that was in honor of that battle, in a sense. Yeah.
The Customs House.
Isn't that something fascinating? I know you're very proud of your dad. And
I remember him saying one time, I think this would have been in the early 30s, there was a murder in Dublin, and at the murder scene they found either a bus ticket or a tram ticket, and they went back to the company and they were able to say, oh, that was such and such. At that time there would have been conductors, and it turned out that this man, he was able to say, oh, that was the last bus, in wherever the area was, and there was only one person on it that got off, and he was able to give them a very good description of the man.
Who he was, yeah.
And they eventually traced him back from that.
From that information.
From that.
Your dad as a detective then, yeah. Wow. And like you're saying, that we were just talking earlier how their murder just didn't happen in Ireland back in the day, and so when it happened, it was, which is good, but it was big news. That's amazing. So, what a life, and obviously he told you he would share stories. And are you how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I just had one sister.
One sister.
She was 4.5 years old, and then she died 4 years ago.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So he would tell stories, and when did he get out of the police force? You said he died in 1960.
Yeah, 61.
61, yeah.
He was still in the police at that time.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
really?
He was still in
okay, yeah. That's great. Well, Sean, any other stories before we close about your fascinating historical father?
One small time, my sister actually, a year or two before she died, she was sobbing, and when she was at school, she met this friend, and the girl was actually her whole family were English. She was born in England, and she came home with my father, and she was sort of, what will I? And she said, I met a new friend, and he said, yeah, good. And she said, but she's English. And he said, so?
Right.
What's wrong with that?
Right.
She thought maybe
he was still bitter towards the English. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that generation would be very embittered.
Like in the 1950s, the IRAs who were known then, at that time they were going around and they would have been blown up customs posts, but these would be unmanned posts on the border.
Yeah.
So there was no one in them or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so the father was mildly amused that this is at least costing.
Yeah. It's money.
Money.
Yeah.
So there was still that bit of it. But a while after, an RUC sergeant was shot and killed, and then his attitude was totally different.
You're right, right.
It was different when they were,
Killing people, yeah, yeah.
you know, when
Yeah.
they were causing a bit of money, if you like.
That in the 50s, I guess.
That would have been in the
50s.
early 50s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then of course, he's a policeman, so he's, the IRA is fighting against the police in the South and the North at that point,
That's
really.
right, yeah.
And of course, later the IRA changes more. I guess
Oh,
in the
yeah,
1960s they have
more,
a lot of Marxist
aggressive,
mentality gets into it and that kind of stuff. So. Well, Sean, I'm so glad you told me. It's amazing. I got more questions than ever now. My head is like, what a fascinating man. It makes me want to go read some more Irish history, that period, and really get into it and understand what happened there and just the different people and players. So thanks so much for letting us interview you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope it's some help.
No, it's great.